Hello, assalamu alaikum, and good evening. We are in our 63rd installment of our seminar series at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University. I welcome our esteemed panelists and also our participants and viewers from across the world who are tuning in by our YouTube channel and Facebook Live. Today we have a very pertinent topic, the race to normalization with the occupation, regarding the current wind that seems to have blown through the Muslim world, in which countries are normalizing at a faster pace with the occupation of the Palestinian people. The Center for Islam and Global Affairs regularly, fortnightly, tries to take hold of very important issues of geostrategic importance and international relations for the Middle East, better called the Western Asia, and the Muslim world. The topic on all of our minds in this region is trying to understand the bewildering situation we are faced with, in which countries and states are seemingly creating a kind of a false realism argument towards normalizing with the Zionist entity known as Israel. Today, I would like to introduce three of our guests, very prominent scholars and public intellectuals on the issue of Palestine and on the issue of, history, cultural studies, and international relations. First, I will ask Dr. Ramzi Baroud to speak. Ramzi is he is a historian, a professor, a doctor, a writer, a journalist. He has commented in many different prominent magazines on the question of Palestine. He is also a well-published author. His books range from many in many different presses. He is also a senior research fellow, non-resident senior research fellow with us at CIGA. We are honored to have him. Alongside him, we have Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi, who is the director and senior scholar of the Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diaspora studies at San Francisco State University. She's the past director of the Center for Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. Joining both of them is Dr. Sami Al-Arian, who is the director of our center, the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, and a public affairs professor at Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University. He, like his colleagues and fellow panelists, is very well published and is an expert on the Muslim world, international relations, and the Middle East. I will ask Dr. Baroud to go first. I ask him to speak. Obviously, he will introduce this topic, but the idea is that he will speak a few words about why is normalization a part of the arsenal that the Zionist state is using currently, and allow us to think about the strategy around why this is important right now. Dr. Abdulhadi will speak from a different perspective, but on the same topic. I invite her to speak and make some comments about what this means for the Palestinians, the Palestinian freedom movement, and the strategies that Palestinians and allies of Palestinians should take. And finally, I will invite Dr. Sami Al-Arian to speak about the larger context of this and how to interpret this in terms of the coming future in a multipolar world. Each person will have approximately 20 minutes to make their opening comments, and we will try to rush forward to have a very lively discussion on a topic that concerns us all. So without any further delay, I invite Dr. Ramzi Baroud. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Han, for the introduction and for all the work that you and, of course, Dr. Sami and CIGA have been doing to raise awareness of many critical issues, not just within the context of Palestine and Israel, but also within the larger context of the Middle East and the Ummah as a whole. Just to define a few things before we start and kind of try to debunk several myths about normalization. When we say normalization, the word itself does not seem to be terribly threatening. What is wrong of making things that are abnormal normal? But of course, the functional definition of normalization is that trying to create some sort of a facade for stability in the Middle East at the expense of the Palestinian people. This is not our understanding of it as Palestinians. This is not some sort of a biased projection of normalization by those who stand on the side of the Palestinians. This is what it is, as defined by the very people who have been championing normalization. And we've heard this actually quite recently from a top United Arab Emirates official who said that the track of normalization with Israel has absolutely nothing to do with the events ongoing in Palestine. So this is extremely troubling for us Palestinians. Why? Because Arab unity, and I'm talking about political unity. I'm not talking about what is there in the heart and how do they feel about Palestine within the ruling classes, whether in Egypt or United Arab Emirates or Bahrain. I am talking about the politically declared and publicly declared political position, is that there is some kind of unity around certain things concerning Palestine. We need to end the Israeli occupation. We want a Palestinian state. And I'm not going to delve into one state, two states. That's not our discussion for today. We need the right of return for Palestinians to be nominally respected. At least that's how the Arab Peace Initiative, which was championed by the Saudis, declared in 2002. And I do remember at the time we were very strongly against the use of language in the Arab Peace Initiative. And now we are longing to go back to those days. How ironic, and how things have fundamentally changed regarding the Arab political perception of Palestine. And we had a problem with it because it seemed to dismiss some fundamental issues regarding Palestine and the Palestinian struggle, starting with the right of return, that made it appear as if it's not really a right as much as it was an issue to be sorted out through some sort of justice that would be accepted by the Palestinian leadership, not necessarily by the Palestinian people, and not necessarily in a way that is consistent with international law. As a Palestinian, and I've learned the Edward Said method of self-critique, is that you always start critiquing yourself before you criticize others. And based on that, I have to tell you that normalization would have not been possible without Oslo. And this comes from a person who has traveled many parts of the world, and I've met with various government officials in Africa, in Asia, and other parts of the global south. And they would say, well, this is really great what you are telling us in solidarity and Palestine and the mutual national liberation history and intersectionality and all the good stuff. But at the end of the day, it's your embassy that is telling us it's okay to do business with Israel. It is you who normalized with Israel first. It's you who signed various agreements with Israel before any of us have done. So it's kind of a miracle that the Palestinian supposed leadership has done so, and some of these countries haven't actually normalized for decades. And that is really what is so bewildering, not the fact that they are finally catching up and normalizing. So much of this blame really falls squarely on the Palestinian so-called leadership. But that said, for Israel, this is a dream. It has been a dream from the very beginning. I mean, this goes back to the roots of the Israeli Zionist state from the very beginning. They wanted to create clear separation between two tracks. We want to colonize, we want to ethnically cleanse, we want to do whatever we need to do to maintain demographic majority of Jews over Palestinians. We wanted to rewrite the history of Palestine. We want the land, we don't want the people. Basically, Israel is a full-fledged settler colonial state by any basic academic intellectual definition. But on the other hand, we want to do business with the Arabs. We don't have a problem with that. And we know that from well-documented records of all sorts of exchanges happening between various Israeli Zionist leaders early on, including Ben Gurion himself, but Golda Meir in particular, and other Arab rulers and Arab officials throughout the years. And we know that Israel has officially and publicly had trade offices in various Arab countries. We know that Israeli sports teams have been welcomed by countries that supposedly criminalizes normalization with Israel. We know all of these things, and we know of Tzipi Livni's open visits to some countries that are supposedly today in the Gulf are remain steadfast against normalization and all of that. We Palestinians are not stupid. We are following the news, and we know. And I was in one of these countries during the time of Tzipi Livni's visit, and I remember the euphoria among some of the people involved in the media organization I worked with, and I couldn't fathom that this is a woman who had just said that Israel wants to send a message to the Palestinians that if you touch an Israeli, Israel goes wild. Israel goes crazy in its response, literally killing and wounding thousands of Palestinians. And yet, shortly after, she was being hosted as the Queen of Sheba in some Arab country. So we know that there is a lot of underhanded approaches to normalizations. And I can't really think of many exceptions, frankly. Maybe Algeria, a couple of others, but I can't think of any fundamental exception to this rule. There are some countries in the Middle East that stood for the Palestinians and used Palestinians in their election campaigns. Not once a campaign would start without Gaza and Jenin and Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque being utilized. Yet at the same time, the total trade value of these countries and Israel kept growing. So this is underhanded, and it's always been this way. This is has been really the essential, or the roots of normalizations have begun years and years ago. This whole notion that, and this is one of the myths, that it was Donald Trump that started this, that it was Jared Kushner, that it was this so-called deal of the century. Not at all. This has been going on for years. What the deal of the century has done is just basically drop that final fig leaf. Because from a geopolitical point of view, these countries began realizing we need to think long-term. The Middle East is changing, the world is changing, there's these massive geopolitical transitions. Everybody is now talking about gas, everybody is talking about energy, everybody is talking about trade routes, and the world is turning into various camps, and everybody wants to increase and lock in new alliances at the expense of the Palestinians because we have no geopolitical assets. So why don't we have any geopolitical assets? Because Palestinians, and I know Sami is going to be elaborating on this, because our geopolitical assets for us Palestinians throughout the years has been solidarity. And I know it sounds kind of, what kind of a geopolitical anything is this? But solidarity, التضامن العربي والإسلامي, the Islamic and Arab solidarity, way before the Palestinian movement took off in the West, has been the bread and butter of the Palestinian struggle, knowing that we have lines of defense. knowing that the moment that Israel is going to touch a Muslim or a Christian shrine in Jerusalem, the moment that Israel attacks Gaza, you're going to have millions of people going to the streets. And that is going to put pressure. And they are going to go to American embassies, and they are going to, what seems to be ineffectual is actually very important. Standing in front of American embassies in their millions, chanting for Palestine, the Americans phoning in, the Israelis say, you need to stop this. We can't afford the repercussions of whatever you're doing to the Palestinians. Much of this has stopped. After the so-called Arab Spring, much of this has stopped because the Arabs now found themselves struggling their own existential struggles in various Arab countries. And that's how Palestine became marginalized. So we lost, or we are rapidly losing that kind of solidarity that translated to something meaningful politically. So the Arabs compromised a long time ago. The Arabs normalized a long time ago, but they could not turn that into an open diplomatic ties because there was always this buffer. The Ummah, whether Arab or Muslim Ummahs, they were a buffer. And this is why they kind of played this kind of balancing act. There is no need for a balancing act as well anymore. And this is why this is happening. And it's devastating for us Palestinians because we see a Palestinian leadership that is willing to play according to the new rules. They're not calling for anybody. They are not leading any boycott campaigns. They are not appealing to the spirit of the Arab people. There's no international solidarity campaign that is being launched. They are ready to benefit from this somehow. Money, investments, funds. So this is only going to stop or be reversed when the Palestinians develop their own powerful geopolitical assets. What are your perks? What are your privileges that you can, or leverage that you can use to stop this and to reverse this as a Palestinian people? You can only do this through a truly representative Palestinian leadership. Now, as far as Israel is concerned, they've never really had a problem with this. In fact, if you look back at the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, Ariel Sharon, known as the butcher of Sabra and Shatila, known as the bulldozer of Gaza for destroying entire neighborhoods in the Shati refugee camp and beyond, he actually created a condition. He said, I will pull out of Lebanon if there is a normalization deal with the Arabs. This is well documented. The same thing was repeated in the 90s when the Syria-Israel negotiations started. I will carry out, or we will carry out, partial withdrawal from the Golan Heights if there is normalization with the Arabs. So for the Israelis, and that's a second myth that needs to be debunked, there is no negotiations. Israel is not involved in negotiations because Israel has nothing to compromise. Israel has no reason of why not to normalize with the Saudis, with anybody else. There is no reason. Israel is in a state in which it can win everything and it has very little to lose. A good example of that is that just a couple of weeks ago, the new numbers by the Israeli Trade Ministry of Trades and Economics or whatever came up with the new stats that they say Israel has lost 60% of its total foreign investments in Israel. So first 3 quarters of 2023, Israel managed to only get something like $2.6 billion. That is, considering the constant growth in the previous years, that number should have been a lot higher. That did not happen. It did not happen because Israel is acquiring a terrible brand for itself. Israeli society is divided like never before, not since the Nakba. And the confidence that investors have in Israel has waned, obviously. They don't want to invest in an unstable country, and Israel is an unstable country.
Ramzi,
so Israel
excuse my interruption, but yes, if you could wrap up your comments, because we'll come back to the points you've raised, the discussion.
Oh, absolutely. But I told I have 20 minutes, and I've been talking for about 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, just a five more minutes if that's okay. I just wanted to give you a
Oh,
warning.
yeah, absolutely, no problem.
Just keep you conscious of the time.
Absolutely.
Sorry about the
Of
interruption.
course. Not a problem at all. So for Israel, imagine normalization with the Saudis. There's going to be this massive flood of cash coming in to Israel, the same way that there was a large amount of cash coming in when the free trade agreement with the United Arab Emirates was signed in March. And when another big agreement in investing in Israel, also by the United Arab Emirates, was signed in June, I believe. Imagine the Saudis, one of the largest economies in the world, is set in the coming years to be one of the top 10 largest economies in the world. Israel needs money to create more breathing room for a crumbling economy. And it is sad to actually see that the very countries that did not really get terribly involved in the process of the liberation of Palestine are the ones who are actually giving Israel that lifeline. Imagine if these lifelines did not exist since 2017 alone. Imagine if this, we are calling for international boycott, but imagine if Arab countries and Muslim countries, whether that are operating openly or discreetly, seized investments and trades in Israel. The Israeli economy is going to suffer a great deal. So Israel is desperate. Netanyahu in particular is even more desperate. Let's remember his first visit to Africa through Uganda in 2016, I believe, when he called for, basically he was trying to explore new venues beyond Israel's total reliance on the United States, financially and militarily and otherwise. And Netanyahu goes to Uganda and to East Africa, selling Israeli technologies, security technologies, basically the same war machines that are being used and experimented on Palestinians, selling Israeli agricultural products, selling Israeli watering systems to fight desertification and all of these things. And he goes back to Israel. And since then, he has been selling the normalization with African countries, especially Muslim African countries, as his winning card to convey and to display his success in foreign policy and in diplomacy. So Netanyahu particularly needs normalization with the Saudis as the biggest selling points to create jobs, to revive the economy, and so forth and so on. So what I think, and I'm going to conclude with this, is we have to be realistic about the kind of tools that we Palestinians have to fight against this. Now, as far as the Arab countries that are normalizing, my belief is that this is going to blow up in everybody's face at one point because Israel is not a reliable partner. I mean, I'm thinking independently from the Palestinians and the justice of the Palestinian cause. I'm thinking in pure political terms. Israel has betrayed the United States itself, has spied on the White House, has sold American technology to China and to other enemies of Washington. So imagine their view of the Arabs that is entirely racist. They have no respect for Arabs. They have no respect for Muslim culture. They have no respect for Islam. And so from their point of view, this is going to be an opportunity to make money and make money only, but they will not. And eventually they are going to betray these very countries that they are normalizing with. That's another subject. As far as Palestinians are concerned, we need to think about what kind of tools do we actually have. We can't just dismiss this issue by saying, as some well-respected activist has said, well, the Al Saud or the Saudis have sold out a long time ago, so who cares? No, it does matter, because the moment that the Saudis, one of the most influential Muslim countries, are going to normalize, you are going to see other countries that I don't want to name to create a precedent, but there will be countries that derive their legitimacy as Muslim majority countries from their connection with Saudi Arabia, that will go and normalize as well. And if Israel is flush with cash, if Israel's economy is strong, and if Netanyahu is once more at the helm of Israeli leadership and society, the struggle for Palestine and the Palestinians is going to be a lot harder. We have to consider all of this and to consider what kind of mechanism that we Palestinians have to fight against all of this. And I would be extremely keen to hear the ideas and the feedback of the respected professors we have with us today. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baroud. Again, apologies for interrupting, but what I took away from your keen insights is that currently, while normalization has been a part of the strategy of Israel for a very long time, the current crisis, economic crisis that is facing Israel, has moved this normalization into almost a top priority. And therefore, it's actually a one-way policy, because it is a policy that is needed now for Israel, and it is a policy that will save Israel, which is facing economic troubles. And these are the primary motivations inside of Israel which are pushing forward this process. And I look forward to engaging you further on this insight. In the meantime, I would like to invite Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi to give her comments on how we should be thinking about this process as people in solidarity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ovaz. Thank you so much, Dr. Arian and CIGA, for inviting me. I come from San Francisco State University that sits on the unceded, colonized indigenous land of the Ohlone people. And this is very much connected to what we're talking about today, the ways in which normalization of the settler colonial regime in Palestine, namely Israel, is being treated. I was asked to address 3 questions, and I will be beginning with them. First, beginning with what the flyer for this event says. The flyer of this event shows a photo of Palestinians holding a sign that says "Tatbi'a khiyana," normalization is treason. And it says that it has hashtags: Gaza under attack, Free Palestine, Save Sheikh Jarrah. Obviously, each one of these hashtags signals one particular aspect of Palestine. And of course, if we're going to look at many of the signs that people have been raising, this specifically speaks about a particular period. But I want to go back first and say, why is normalization? Why is tatbi'a khiyana? Why is that a treason, normalization? As I've said before, and Dr. Baroud has also said today, is it comes from normalizing. And when you say normalize, making things that abnormal normal, but it has this tone of sanitization, of making things that are really bad look good. And this is historically part of the colonial discourses, whether we look at how Israel does it, how the United States does it, and all repressive forces, they always try to sugarcoat things that are really bad. Why is this happening, and what does this mean? And is this really betrayal? What kind of betrayal? I think it would be betrayal if we're talking about Palestinian parts who are betraying the Palestinian cause, or we're talking about the people in the Arab world who are betraying the Palestinian cause. The Arab governments historically have been very much part and parcel of the rule of the US and Israel and their so-called strategic agreement and goals for the region. However, for the Palestinian people in particular, and I'll come back to that, the Palestinian people, there is, in order for normalization and treason to take place, you really need to have local agents who are willing to actually make this happen. And I think this is where, from the Palestinian perspective, betrayal comes in. Betrayal comes in because the Arab people in general have historically supported the Palestinians. And every single time we hear from one area or another that says that Palestinians are the Arab people have forgotten about Palestine, we are confronted with another evidence, whether it is the World Cup FIFA, whether it is the demonstrations, whether it is the Algerian team, even in football, cheering the Palestinian team against it, whether it is the demonstrations that are happening day in and day out in most of the areas in the Arab Muslim world and the third world and around the world where it is allowed. And we have to remember that the reason it's not allowed is because there are repressive regimes that block people from doing this. Now, in order for this treason to take place on a Palestinian level, you need local agents. And this goes hand with hand with the whole study of colonialism. Colonialism does require groups and parties who experience and exercise internalized colonialism, as Frantz Fanon and many anti-colonial theorists talked about. Edward Said refers to it as native informants, members of our own communities who are willing to actually provide information, security, analysis, facilitate what's going on. And I believe one of the things that have happened recently is that two things that have happened specifically around the Saudi possible public normalization with Israel, as because this has been going on for a very long time. One is that there was a delegation from Palestinians, at least we know that publicly, that was made up of Hussein Sheikh, who is supposed to be the heir apparent to Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, when he steps down, although there is huge opposition within even the Fatah party towards that. Farag, who is the head of the intelligence, and then a diplomatic, Majid Kayali, who is a diplomat of that. They visited Saudi Arabia in order to kind of, we don't know what's happened there, but maybe we will be presented in the future with another version of WikiLeaks that will tell us exactly what has happened, but we can imagine what has been going on. Why is that the case? Why is it really necessary? And then we saw a Saudi ambassador coming to visit the Palestinian areas in order to make it palatable to the Palestinians that the Saudi government, under the leadership of MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, is actually interested in the Palestinian movement and make it palatable to do that, propose balloons to do that. But we do know that from the interviews of Mohammed bin Salman, from all the statements from the Saudi government, from all the statements that have been said multiple again and again and again by the US officials, analysis, the multiple think tanks and so on, we know that the goal is, and Mohammed bin Salman specifically said it, is stabilization of the Palestinian Authority, giving money to the Palestinian Authority, preserving the so-called two-state solution, and which is a facade, which is only a mirage in the minds of some people in the Palestinian Authority. Nobody else actually believes in it or is committed to it, including Israeli government of Netanyahu and other Israeli governments too. I mean, even since Oslo, this has never been actually part of that. And said that we are going to give money to stabilize the Palestinian Authority, give money to the security forces, and this is also what the US has been doing. So we know that the goal is specifically to make this stable. The other actions, for example, that they said that it is based on the so-called Arab Peace Plan or initiative. The Arab Peace Plan had talked about withdrawal from lands occupied in '67, including the Golan Heights, including Jerusalem, including the Lebanese lands that were occupied by Israel, the right of return for Palestinian refugees based on the United Nations Resolution 194, as well as Palestinian independence and freedom. None of these things are going to be complied with now, according to this so-called deal that the Saudi Arabia is going to normalize with Israel, because according to Saudi Arabia, according to the Palestinian Authority statements themselves, anybody who talks about why is this really necessary for the stability of the region, it has nothing to do with these goals. Even the low level of the Arab Peace Plan that was adopted, and I want to just say that it was adopted in 2002. Tomorrow is going to be the 23rd anniversary of Sharon's invasion of the Aqsa Mosque, along with his dogs and his soldiers, that provoked and led to the Aqsa Intifada, in which Palestinians were resisting day in and day out, as resisting and showing that this 7 years of Oslo has not really been accepted by majority of the Palestinians, even though Palestinians were excited by PLO returnees and so on. And some Palestinians thought that something might happen. A lot did not. But this Arab Peace Plan actually talked about that, and it came specifically in March 28, 2002, specifically to pacify what was going on of the resistance under the Aqsa Intifada. Yasser Arafat, the late Yasser Arafat, the chairman of the PLO, actually was under house arrest in the Muqata'a. The Israeli military has even cut off his ability to use even to flush toilets, of having clean water. He was not even allowed to go to that Arab summit in Beirut in order to attend. He couldn't attend because Sharon told him at that time, if you're going to go, you're not going to be able to come back to Palestine. The conditions under it, this so-called peace plan came specifically in order to create particular conditions to pacify what was going on under Palestine. And this is historically has been the relationship with every single liberation movement. If we think about Vietnam, think about Algeria, think about South Africa, whenever there is any kind of movements that grows so much, there is always attempts to pacify it, contain it. And so this was the Arab peace plan. But what they're doing today is not even, it doesn't even rise to that Arab peace plan. Okay, so the second point that I was asked to speak about is what is the relationship? What's the response of Palestinian various groups? I already spoke about the Palestinian Authority, which is sort of welcoming, and it doesn't even talk anymore about al-Muharramat, the red lines. Palestinian Authority doesn't speak about that, and Dr. Baroud spoke about it. I don't really need to repeat that, but I want to say that all the factions of the PLO, aside from the official Palestinian Authority, which I would say has nothing to do with the Palestine Liberation, the organization as it was created, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of the Palestine, Al-Mubadara, all the factions have already stood against and took positions publicly. The Palestinian resistance groups that are not within the PLO, due to various historical reasons, such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad, have already also issued very strong positions against it and came out very clearly about that. Palestinian people themselves, intellectuals and article activists, have already written a lot about that, and also have been speaking a lot about what does this really mean in terms of this, even going to the Arab peace plan, which is very, very different than, let's say, the Khartoum summit in 1967, which on September 1st, which basically said no negotiations, no settlement, no recognition of Israel. Things have changed a lot. They have changed a lot because the abilities of the Arab governments and their support by the US and the presence of Israel in the region, and that has changed a lot of these things. Now, how much more time do I have, Dr. On?
You have another 5 minutes.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So and I was going to actually incur a little bit on Dr. Arian's talk, but I'm not going to go there, of course, because Dr. Arian is more than capable than presenting what he needs to do. So the question is now is what are the last question I was asked, what are the likely scenarios in the future struggle of the Palestinians? And obviously there is so much more to discuss with all. I believe one is that there is, for the future struggle, I believe that we're going to see more and more and more deterioration in the Palestinian Authority towards compliance with Israel, because the Palestinian Authority relies on the US for its funding, and it's going to get now funding from Saudi Arabia. It relies on the US for training of its security forces, that none of which are actually participating in protecting Palestinian population. On the contrary, they are the gendarmes and the repressive tools in order to suppress all Palestinian ways of freedom, whether it is resistance against the Israeli occupation, in which there is a quote-unquote security cooperation. I think we really need to actually even think about all the vocabulary that we are using with Israel, working hand in hand with Israel, handing the fighters who are resisting Israeli occupation, whether you're talking about Jenin, whether you're talking about Al-Khalil, whether you're talking about Gaza, whether you're talking about the 48 areas, there is always a hand of the Palestinian Authority security forces that also have been trained by the US military and also rely on the US for their funding and so on. And actually Israel really needs it. And Netanyahu has spoken multiple times and said we actually need the Palestinian Authority to act as a subcontractor, policeman over the Palestinian people. So I expect that to continue more and more and more. I expect to see much more and more split within Fatah and people coming out. Fatah, the main party, the ruling party, actually splitting over that. I expect more and more to see a deepening of positions of all the Palestinian opposition. There is multiple initiatives now that emphasize on وحدة الشعب, وحدة الأرض, وحدة القضية, the unity of the people, unity of the land, and unity of the cause. No more are Palestinians deluded or even seduced by possibilities, quote unquote, of a state, independent state. And I think when we say even two-state solution, that's a colonialist term. Palestinian independence state, that's no longer possible at all. So everybody's talking about the unity of the land from the river to the sea. I have a lot of confidence in the resistance that's going on, all forms of resistance, from the militant resistance that every single day we see more creative ways of people sacrificing and standing up, to the prisoners in the Israeli jails who are confronting and conducting hunger strike day after day. We know the latest Khadr Adnan, the martyr, who actually died as a result, actually was killed, we should say assassinated by the Israeli authorities, because he went on a hunger strike to protest administrative detention, which by all laws, international laws, all laws, is actually a crime against humanity. And he was killed, and his body incidentally is still being captive by Israel, and they refuse to hand it over. We see the resistance continuing in Sheikh Jarrah, in Silwan, in Lid, in Akka, in Gaza, in Jerusalem, in Jenin, in Nablus, in every single area of Palestinian. There is constantly, every single day, some things we hear about, something we don't hear about, because there is an interest in international media that is very much working hand in hand with the Israeli Zionist lobby and with the US and with the Saudis in order to silence all of this stuff. I believe that we are going to be seeing also more popular resistance, and I see more and more and more collaboration around the whole question of boycott, divestment, and sanction to hold Israel accountable for all the crimes against humanity that it has committed. The final point I want to say is that when we talk back again about Saudi Arabia, the relationship with Saudi Arabia itself, this is Saudi Arabia even in itself, in naming it, it's not really a legitimate country. What is a country named after a family that has historically collaborated with some part of the Palestinian leadership in order to suppress Saudis people within the Arabian Peninsula, from handing over the fighter Nasser al-Said, the long struggler Nasser al-Said, to the Saudis, to the various abysmal human rights record of Saudi Arabia, that the United States says again and again and again that they want to respect human rights and the right of law. But we know that Saudi Arabia chopped up Jamal Khashoggi. We know that Saudi Arabia is repressing people day in and day out. And we know that the collaboration with the Palestinian Authority and the whole security collaboration between Saudi Arabia, Israel, the United States, and the Palestinian Authority is not going to lead to anything good. However, I have complete faith and confidence, and that is not a utopian vision. That is really based on what we are seeing day in and day out of a Palestinian people over 100 years of colonization, over 75 years of Nakba. Palestinians continue every single day to insist with their voices, with their feet, with staying on the land, with their olives, with their guns, with their speeches, with their talk, with their refusal to normalize the occupation and colonization and racism and apartheid on their land. And that is not a utopian vision. That is something that will happen, and that will defeat all these attempts to liquidate the Palestinian cause and impose normalization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdulhadi. Your comments are not only passionate, but they're also very much clear in drawing the line between what is, the designs, the colonial designs in the region, and what is the resistance to those designs. One of the threads that Dr. Barou's talk is your Palestinian leadership. I mean, I don't know if cynicism is the right word here. What I in the lines of what you have said is that the Palestinian leadership as local agents, as compradors, is no longer legitimate in representing the interests of the Palestinian people. And this presents us with a new front of how to deal with this situation. I'm looking forward to hearing in the comments that follow, what are some strategies that we may take in pointing our resistance toward this new problem, which has its own histories, but at this juncture presents a more critical position. Moving along, to give his comments. Dr. Sami, the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First, I want to thank Awais for his kind introduction and my two colleagues for their comments. And I would like to do is to build up on their comments. The essence of the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian issue, is an effort that has surpassed a century and quarter of the Zionist movement, a settler, colonialist, supremacist movement. At its heart, it's racist against Arabs, Muslims, and Christians, in trying to uproot the Palestinians from their homeland and replace them, ethnically cleanse them and replace them with Jews around the world. At the essence, this is the heart of the conflict. When we talk about normalization, we are talking about an effort to legitimize this effort. That's in a sentence what this struggle is about and what normalization, the meaning of normalization is. One of the most difficult problems that the Zionist movement have had to face throughout its effort to uproot the Palestinians and replace them with a Zionist state was to be legitimized. For a long time, that effort failed. Up until perhaps the Camp David, up until maybe the 1973 war with Egypt and Syria, which prompted some kind of peace efforts by Kissinger and his ilk that opened relationships. When we talk about relations, we talk about diplomatic relationships with some African countries. But Israel, up to that point, particularly after 1967, after it colonized the whole of Palestine, was pretty much isolated. And people were talking about Israel as a state that is similar to apartheid South Africa. At any rate, these so-called peace efforts that started with Kissinger and ended with the peace treaty with Egypt in 1979, and before that, the Camp David Accords in 1978, opened the door for Israel to be accepted, that colonization of Palestine to be accepted, even though at the time they were talking about recognizing Israel on the 1960 and 1948 areas and excluding the 1967 territories. Now, let's review a little bit, these international efforts, because up until that point, if we start with the partition plan of the 1947 UN Resolution 181, which basically gave the Jews who were illegal immigrants and colonizers of Palestine and only represented about a third of the population, 55% of Palestine, and the majority of the people, the real owners of Palestine, 45%, even that was not accepted by the Zionist movement. If some leaders were championing the fact that they get legitimacy by establishing their own country, the overall militias, the gangs, the Irgun, the Leumi Levi, and other militias and other groups and other parties, actually, they were always championing what is called today Greater Israel. At any point, the point I'm trying to make is that Israel never really had in mind to simply establish a state, but to establish a state that will be strong to the point that it can defeat all what it declares its enemies combined. And but there's always a problem with getting legitimacy. We're getting recognized by the victims, by the people that they dispossessed, that they recognize Israel. That their first breach came in the 1979 peace treaty with Egypt. So for strategic reasons, of course, they thought that this was a golden opportunity to get the biggest Arab country to recognize them and completely be neutralized from that effort. But even on top of that, they took sovereignty from Sinai. Sinai is just, it's about 2.5 times the territory of Palestine, and it was completely demilitarized, and where also the Egyptian government will have limited sovereignty over it. So that was a great bargain for Israel in order to complete its colonization of the Palestinian territories. But they always lacked that legitimacy, because even if they do it by force, even if they do it militarily, even if they do it by trying to subjugate the Palestinian people, their true, but not only victims, they were always lacking this legitimacy, not only from the Palestinians, but also from the region as a whole. So what they try to do is to create what's called facts on the ground. And creating facts on the ground is always rejecting what's being proposed and waiting for the next Arab concession and the next Arab concession and the next Arab concession. The first Arab concession was 242, because the struggle before that was that this entity, this Zionist entity that was established in 1948 was illegitimate, because the Palestinian, the true owners of the land, they were never conceded the fact that they could be dispossessed, where over 2/3 of Palestinians were basically run out, were exiled, were forced from their homes and territories. And the struggle was to bring them back in and not to accept this illegitimate exclusivist state. But by 1967, the call was just simply to accept Israel as before 1967 and simply to withdraw from territories. But even those Israel rejected, starting from the Rogers Plan in 1970, followed by many other initiatives, including, of course, what happened in Camp David. And I don't have the time to go over all these initiatives, but what happened is that the Palestinian leadership, they totally lost the true essence of what this conflict is about, what the true hope and ambition of the Palestinian people are. So they gave up. They gave up that struggle, starting from 1974 in the 10 points plan, and then culminating in Oslo. And what happens after that, that, as Ramzi pointed out correctly, opened the door for Israel to be accepted worldwide under the illusion that this somehow is going to lead to a so-called two-state solution, while this mirage called two-state solution has always been just a mirage, because Israel never implemented any, and when I say any, I said any of the plans that would have led to such a case. All the so-called the final status negotiations, they from the very start, and I remember we were talking that even when this was signed back in 93, 94, but for the past 27 years, if anything, we should have buried this so-called two-state solution a long time ago, including in the waning days of Obama, when they were talking about the end, when they voted in the Security Council resolution against settlements. At any rate, what's happened since, of course, is that, as also Rabab pointed out, there were several initiatives. By the way, it didn't start with the so-called Arab Peace Initiative in 2002, even started before that. I remember the called Crown Prince Fahd Plan of 1982 in the wake of the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon, which after that became the King Fahd Plan, which after that became the King Abdullah Plan, which after that became the Arab Peace Initiative Plan. And with every plan and successive plan, there were more concessions. So in the Zionist mind, why should we even give in to anything? If we stay steadfast, we were always going to get more concessions. And Netanyahu and his ilk and the Zionist ideology, basically their starting from Shamir and also even during Rabin. Rabin never really gave up anything of substantive. Oslo is all about one thing. Palestinians, the historical victims of Zionism, they will recognize Israel, which is the most sought after concession that they could ever get in exchange for Israel to recognize the PLO as their negotiating partner. And of course, when you talk about negotiating partner, you're talking about the complete imbalance of power in which Israel gave nothing. So at the heart of normalization is to get this legitimacy. But even with that, even with the recognition of the Palestinian leadership, the majority of the Palestinians were never have never given that recognition. And more importantly, the overwhelming majority of people beyond Palestine have seen Israel for what it is, a settler, colonialist, exclusivist, supremacist state that's trying to approach the natives in favor of invaders. But let me, because of the limited amount of time, and we really need to move into discussion, talk about the recent wave of these normalizations. We're talking about, of course, starting with Trump, and he was able to get many Arab states like the Emirates and Bahrain, and they started also the process with Sudan, before that Mauritania, and some others behind the scenes, and now lately with Saudi Arabia. And you could see all these efforts have really absolutely nothing to do with Palestine. And of course, before that, Wadi Araba, Jordan would never have signed except for Oslo. And therefore, these states, they really don't care about Palestinians. The regional order after the Arab Spring has shown the possibility, the potential that this order could collapse at any moment. And if that order collapses, these regimes, which mostly are brutal, dictatorial, tyrannical, who really have no real legitimacy except the legitimacy of the sword, they wanted to be part of a structure, a security structure, where they could preserve their powers. And if you look at the three conditions that the Saudi crown prince, the monarch, has put in order to normalize with Israel, none of it has anything absolutely to do with Palestine. He is asking about security guarantees from the United States, and you would wonder who would that be for, because the security guarantee in terms of the regional order with the number one purchaser of the most advanced weaponry in the world is really a joke, except to think that this is part of also preserving the power of the ruling family over its own citizens, that they can do whatever they like in order to stay in power. It's not just about the Saudi state itself. Secondly, getting a nuclear reactor, which I suppose to balance the Iranian nuclear reactor, not the Israeli nuclear reactor. Here, they don't look at Israel as an enemy, because the only state that actually has with nuclear weapons, not in dozens, but in the hundreds, in the whole region, is Israel. The only one who did not sign the NPT treaty is Israel. But the Arabs are fine with that. And we've seen that during the last NPT ratification, when Mubarak was the last holdout, because he thought that Egypt would be at a disadvantage, but America leaned so much on him, he signed it and left Israel intact. So here we go. And the third one is having advanced weapons, which they are getting anyways. None of these conditions have anything to do with Palestine. So we're talking about, in essence, an attempt by these Arab regimes to basically accept Israel as the hegemon, as the power in which, under its tutelage, under its control, they would be able to preserve their regimes. I cannot see it any other way, for a simple reason. When you look at, and again, here I'm trying to look from a broader perspective, which is the international perspective, what's called the Belt Road Initiative of China, which is trying to connect the whole world, because we are coming now for the past 5 years. We can see that there is two emerging worlds: the world that is dominated by the United States, and the world that is dominated by China. This world, this new world, this emerging world is not there yet. It's going to take probably at least a decade or more for this to take place. And what's happening here internationally is that the Americans are trying to prevent that from coming. So now they are countering this. Of course, they counter it in a different ways in China and in China and the South China Sea and the East China Sea and this whole thing by building coalitions. But worldwide, they're trying to replace that now with what is called the India-Europe trade route. And at the heart of it is to come through Saudi Arabia all the way to Haifa. So this whole thing is building a new coalition, and you could see who would be the big winner in that trade route, who would actually be calling the shots in the Middle East, in the heart of the Arab world. The Palestinians, basically, from an Israeli perspective, from an international perspective, they have no role to play. They are just spoilers. So when you look at that and talk about the struggle of the Palestinian people, we have to again look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture says the following. And I don't want to, again, I think I would have, how many minutes do I have? So I don't go over my 5, 6 minutes. Okay. So when we talk about what's happening there, we need to look at the existential threats from an Israeli perspective. And once we know how they perceive themselves, then we could know what should be the trajectory of the struggle. From an Israeli perspective, they know that they lack the legitimacy because the invader, the robber, the one who steals, the one who rapes, the one who kills, the one who maims, the guilty one, they always know they are guilty. So they're always long for the legitimacy by having the victim confer on them that they are not guilty. So they have a problem, of course. The first problem is and I think Ramzi alluded to that, the demographic bomb threat problem of Palestinians. So that's a problem that they need to do. And this is the perfect time because they perceive this as a moment of weakness for the Arab world, as a moment of to be exploited. In other words, if they can finish the Palestinian problem today, and this is from the Israeli right, I do not say that this is all Israelis agree on this, but at least those who are in power today, they think that this is the perfect moment to end this conflict in their favor. So they would like, or their initiative, their plan, their proposal is to give the Palestinians 3 options. One is to accept Israel as is, an apartheid, exclusivist, supremacist state that they will subject to it. 2, if not, then they could be compensated and go anywhere else. If not, they get killed. These are the 3 choices that they will give. And of course, you have problem within Israel because not only they may differ on the final solution of the Palestinians, but also the nature of the Israeli state. That's the second existential threat. Itself is being now under attack. And so now you have the internal conflicts within. This is deep internal conflict within the Zionist state, religious versus secular, settler versus the city dweller, rich versus poor, Israeli Ashkenazi versus Israeli Sephardim, Arabs versus Israeli. These are huge problems, socially speaking, within the state itself, which does not bode well. So they are trying also to accelerate the acceptance of Israel before the internal implosion takes place and becomes really out of their hands how to put this back together. The third existential threat has to do with the change, as I said, of the international order, which is always, when you're talking about an American-led order with Israel at the heart of it, and I don't have time to go over why that is the case, but when that world order changes, then certainly the balance of power would change. And that was true certainly when the Soviet Union was strong. Israel could not dictate everything it wanted in the region, but if this whole Middle East is under American order, certainly Israel would have a big say we saw how Israel was integrated into the CENTCOM military structure and became basically a player in the force structures throughout the Middle East. Again, that's another conversation. So the change of the international order certainly says, why now? That is changing. So the more Israel is integrated into the world today, the more it will create facts on the ground. It will be difficult from their point of view to reverse. Also, the question of nuclear monopoly is very important because Israel wants to monopolize this. They think this is the weapon of last resort. So they want to build this Middle East that would be Israeli-centric, that Israel would be the strongest, the most important party to it, and therefore they can deny everyone else the ability to challenge Israel and Israeli hegemony. But also another one, which I think both of my colleagues alluded to, is the change of world public opinion. Everybody is saying today that Israel is nothing but another version of an apartheid state. And that is very difficult to defend, very difficult to accept. And therefore, if they can force the acceptance of Israel and end these important questions that haven't been answered in totality yet, and perhaps they can modify this and find another solution for the problem of the Palestinians. But if the resistance stays at all levels, I'm not talking about simply military here and there, I'm talking about the real solidarity movement we are talking about, where Israel becomes a pariah state, where Israel is exposed for what it is, that we can engage, and that's what I've been calling for. I think our goal should no longer be anything other than the complete dismantlement of the Zionist structures and entity. And here I'm talking about Zionist structures. I'm not talking about people per se. Those who would like to live in free societies are welcome to do that, but not at the expense of the rights of others. But the Zionist structures is a danger, not to the Palestinians. And I keep saying that the Palestinians are the first victims, but they're not the last victims. And the Palestinians are small people. They cannot simply on their own resist the Zionist encroachment on the whole region, because Zionism is not just an existence over some territory in Palestine. It's a philosophy, and it's a mentality that colonizes many capitals around the world, not ending with Washington and not ending in other Arab capitals around. These Zionist structures must be dismantled. In other words, we need to free people, not only the people in Palestine, but free the people worldwide, particularly in the Middle East, including, I would say, also Jews themselves. Because what happened to Judaism, it became one of the casualties, one of the victims of Zionism. Today, Jews are suffering, and I think many Jews are realizing this, that to redefine what a Jew is and to tie their fate and their existence to Israel is a grave injustice to them. And part of our struggle is to free them from that. And I think many American Jews and other Jews around the world are starting to realize this dilemma, this problem, and they're trying to free themselves from being enslaved by Zionism. And I think that is one of the struggles that also we have to be a part of, that we need to start thinking in those terms, that this is no longer about relieving suffering of people, even though that's very important. It is no longer about establishing a state for some people, even though that would give them relief. It's about freeing the Palestinians, freeing the people in the region, but also worldwide from this exclusivist, this supremacist ideology that goes hand in hand with white supremacy, with Hindutva, with other types of xenophobic and supremacist ideologies that need to rule the world. So this becomes now a global movement. It is no longer a local movement. And that's what we need to call. So to resist normalization is to start thinking in those terms, how we can build a global movement, solidarity movement, that can engage Zionists and their supporters at all levels, politically, socially, economically, trade-wise, in human rights, legally, in the information world, social media, sports, arts, entertainment, on every aspect you engage them and you start exposing them and you build these movements locally. This is not a struggle for Palestinians in exile to free Palestine. That would be just way too much for us to be able to do it, because at the end of the day, Palestinians, it's not about number game. It's about the ability to mobilize the whole world. So we need to build this whole thing. The same thing in the 60s, where people were came together to support the freedom of the Vietnamese, or they came in the 80s to support the Black South Africans. This is what we're calling about. This is about crumbling this Zionist structure in Palestine. And when that happens, then we can talk about freeing not only the Palestinians, but everyone else. Let me stop here. Even I had intended to say something more, but let me stop here and move on with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sami. I also want to thank the other panelists. It's a lot of ideas to engage and think with. I am in touch with the viewers online who are pushing their questions forward. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
You can.
Yes.
It's good. Okay. So I want to begin the discussion by returning to Dr. Baroud's comments at the beginning, where he alluded to the fact that
okay, now we can't hear you. You're muted. Always, you're muted.
Let me switch my earphones.
Okay, there we go. We can hear you now.
Okay.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to go back to one of the things that Dr. Baroud talked about, which was that the Abraham Accords had dropped the fig leaf, and that, you know, all of the panelists here have been commenting on that the normalization has a long history, and that there is a long kind of process that has been going on since the formation of Israel to try to normalize and legitimize the country. Israel suffers from a deep legitimization crisis, and one of the things that it could benefit from is to be seen as an equal amongst the nations of the world. But the solidarity campaign that Dr. Baroud had said that declined after the Arab Spring, I wanted to ask him to kind of explain why he felt that after the Arab Spring, solidarity for the Palestinian cause, the kind of solidarity that Dr. Sami alluded to, a global movement led by Palestinians, in solidarity with Arabs and Muslims, why this has become less forceful after the Arab Spring.
Right. Thank you, Yves. I think what happened after the Arab Spring is that whatever nominal civil society that existed in Egypt, it existed in Tunisia, it existed in other Arab countries, I think it's been crushed. And we know that there is a nominal representation of civil society that existed in these countries, and there was a margin of space. Yeah, I've attended protests for Palestine in Egypt during the times of Hosni Mubarak, for example. Yes, true that soldiers would have usually outnumbered the protesters, and they would be surrounded from all directions, and as if they are, as if there's desperate attempt at containing them. And once in a while, they would break out from that containment, and they would run to the American embassy and that sort of thing. But there was an element of a Palestine representation within these communities. And it's something that you could hear in even in the way that mosques would, in the Friday prayers that would pray for Palestine and the Palestinians, and there was always this movement created around the Palestine and the Palestinian people, and the regimes allowed it because, number one, they were kind of harmless in terms of establishing any paradigm shift, but it was also kind of like a pressure valve that had to be opened up once in a while, especially during times of massacres and killings and Jenin and all of these Israeli war crimes. But eventually people go back home, but at least it gave some sort of a momentum for some sort of a Palestine solidarity movement in various Arab countries. After the Arab Spring, they were crushed to the point that we would see an Egyptian football fan, for example, with a Palestinian flag would be singled out by the Egyptian military, and they would go after him. They would take his flag down and they would arrest him. So the space completely shrunk. It just doesn't exist there anymore. And I don't want to delve into the argument of, and now Arabs have their own existential threats against their own regimes, which it really is the case. But indeed, when you have the top of Egypt's activists, for example, are in prison, we're not looking at 100 or 200, talking about thousands of them from all movements, not just the Islamists, but the socialists and all others. Well, that was kind of the core of solidarity with Palestine and beyond Palestine. And that has been completely circumvented and confined and eventually crushed. So until the region is stabilized according to a new order, and until there is some new elements of resistance happening at a civil society level and at a social level in the Arab world, we can't count on a major change. We have seen, but that doesn't mean that the Arabs have forgotten about Palestine. And we've seen numerous displays of solidarity with Palestine. And I'm not only talking about the World Cup in Qatar, I'm also talking about the times in which the Egyptian, tens of thousands of them, went and surrounded the Israeli embassy in Cairo, demanding, and put it under siege, demanding a break from the diplomatic ties with Israel. So it's very clear that the priorities of Arabs are still, it's still there. Palestine is still the core of the issue. Major opinion polls year after year indicate that for Arabs, despite of everything, Palestine remains the major issue and Israel remains the largest threat. And what is really interesting is that the Saudis themselves, vast majority of Saudis, Algeria was number one with 99% of Algerians saying that Palestine is the top issue for all Arabs. But the Saudis, I think it was something like 86% of something of that nature. This is all sources of hope that once the Arab nations resurrect out of the ashes of whatever upheaval that they are dealing with and the injustices of their regimes, Palestine is there. Palestine is safe. In other words, as far as the collective Arab feelings and support and solidarity is concerned. The question is, how do we liberate that momentum from the oppressive regimes that already exist there? So Palestinians have their own challenges to deal with. The Arab people have their own challenges to deal with. And this is why I'm really, in my mind, all of this normalization euphoria is quite temporary, because things eventually change. And there will be a time in which Arab regimes are going to find themselves regretting these decisions that they have been making since 2017 at least.
So what I understand what you said is that although the Arab Spring has shifted the expressions of solidarity, that means that, classical images of large masses maybe accumulating in squares in support of Palestinians may not be visible at the current context. But that does not mean that the archive is missing. There is still a very vibrant archive and evidence of Palestinian resistance and solidarity, maybe which has shifted from its traditional aesthetics, its traditional expressions, to new and more creative ways. And I think part of the task for intellectuals like ourselves who are trying to bring out the cause of justice is to keep pointing to the living memories and consciousness that is there amongst Muslims around the world. And I think many times now in our discussions, many people have referenced the World Cup as this new kind of space that expressed the feelings of many in the Arab world. I want to ask something for both Dr. Abdulhadi and Dr. Al-Arian. You see, the question of leadership, is a question that has keep coming up in all the comments thus far. And Dr. Arian, your suggestion of creating a global movement, one of the things that is missing in the Palestinian case, as opposed to South Africa or even in the Vietnam case, is that in both of those cases, there was a charismatic and very theoretically and politically astute leadership, which was at the helm of the freedom movement. Here in the Palestinian case, if we take Dr. Abdulhadi's description of this, I scratch my back, you scratch yours, you keep me in power, you stabilize my little fiefdom in Palestine, and I will help to, and then as you very well pointed out, the Saudis will be able to secure themselves. If this is the situation, what's missing in creating a global consciousness of the level that you have suggested is the leadership. What do we do in this situation?
It's a very good question. Leadership is always important because it inspires people to action. But I want to argue also that leadership shouldn't be looked at simply in terms of personalities. The Palestinian people are under occupation. Certainly, we have a lot of people. I mean, Rabab talked about Khidr Adnan. Most people never heard the name before. And it's very difficult to look up to Khidr Adnan if you don't even know what he is and what he fought for. So we have a problem here in terms of getting the right models, the right people that can inspire the struggle. But also we have to realize that we are in an age that to create proper leadership, to lead the cause, we have to have a vision, because without a vision, leadership means nothing. For a lot of people, Abu Ammar was a leader because he was able to inspire some segments within Palestinian, but his vision was faulty. So it ended up having people totally disappointed and disillusioned. So what I would like to argue, first of all, is that we need to look beyond Palestinians. And I've been trying to argue this point, and it's going to take a while for people to understand it, is that Palestine is not just simply the cause to relieve the suffering of the Palestinian people. It is about to dismantle a racist, supremacist, Zionist structure. And that could take all forms of leadership, including non-Palestinians. I mean, there is no reason why Palestinian has to lead that struggle in the United States and in Germany and in England and in France and in Europe and in Asia and in Africa. Palestinians cannot do that. It's enough for the Palestinians to stay steadfast and to continue their struggle, to continue their resistance, to continue their steadfastness in Palestine and within the refugee camps and around the world. But we need to start creating new kinds of leadership, but that has to embrace a vision. So we are now, I think, in the age of trying to form that vision, to understand that vision, how we can coalesce around that vision, how we can get people to embrace that vision. And then we're going to have all kinds of leaders. In the United States, when we're talking about, let's say, the fight against racism, for a long time, for centuries, there were nothing. I mean, people were still suffering and people, of course, were talking. But eventually, there was a vision under that vision that created different leaders and different movements. And we can say the same. And of course, sometimes you get lucky with someone like Mandela, who can prove. But when Mandela went to prison, there was no consensus on Mandela. It was his steadfastness and his resistance that raised his status. And then he became the leader of a movement. Before that, he was one among many other South Africans who are fighting apartheid. And I think when it comes to the resistance against Zionism, against the encroachment, not only in Palestine, but across the region, that is going eventually lead to movements, lead to global movement. And within that movement, they will be able to also bring about leaders who can inspire others to work. And what's important at the end is the result, not simply somebody to stand up, because that someone, of course, can also commit mistakes or be faulty. But we have to, more importantly at this point, to create that movement that will eventually create its own leaders.
I want to ask Dr. Abdulhadi to jump in.
Thanks so much, Dr. Hun. I agree. I wanted to just raise a few things about one, the comparative aspect of it, and I think I want to probably maybe take over again the case of South Africa, because even though we know that Mandela became the most recognizable figure, we do know that historically there have been many movements in South Africa. Some became very well known, like Mandela, and occupied center stage and ended up negotiating with de Klerk around the whole, the political apartheid. So we still have a lot of injustices, as we know from our own studies and from our sisters and brothers and comrades in South Africa. There have been the Pan-African Congress, the African National Congress of Mandela, the South African Communist Party, the United Democratic Front, Steve Biko's Black Consciousness Movement, the Muslim Youth League in Durban, a lot of groups that are actually not recognized, COSATU, the union movement. There have been many, and actually if you look at all of them, there's so many differences and disagreements and creativity. And I actually think that that's not really a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to be able to have that. And if we, in the meantime, actually have, as Palestinians, only to say that Abu Mazen is the only one who speaks for us, we're in a disaster. We're in a disaster. I actually think the differences and the disagreements and the challenges are excellent for the Palestinian movement today, because it shows, yes, we do need some kind of reference, marja'iyya, that says that this is what the Palestinians want and so on. And so when you go and you ask, we always refer to statistical public opinion polls that show that the majority, overwhelming majority, even by statistical research centers that are funded by the US, even that the one that's funded by the US, even Israel, when they're doing that, it actually shows again and again where Palestinian sentiments are, what do Palestinians want, the whole question of pride, dignity, liberation, freedom, the right of return, the right not to be subjugated, the rejection of the Israeli settler colonial state, the rejection of the repressive forces, that people can sleep at night worrying if they're going to be caught or not. Sometimes they are because their opponents are dissidents, sometimes because they just happen to be in the way. I mean, there is no, and I would say that even the violence by the Palestinian Authority is nothing compared to the violence of the Israeli occupation, but I think separating them together and ranking which is worse and which is better is not a good idea, because they're all connect with each other and feed into each other. It's a dialectical relationship. The other thing I want to say is that every single time Palestinians develop leaders, they get assassinated. I mean, this historically has happened not only in the Palestinian movement. I mean, we know that Steve Biko was killed. Many of the South African, from Ruth First to Katrada, to Chris Hani, many people were assassinated in the Chilean movement and so on. In the Palestinian movement, we know some of the major names like Kamal Udwan, Abu Yusuf al-Najjar, Kamal Nasser, Ghassan Kanafani, Wajid Abu Sharara, Wa'il Z'aitar, many we know. And then we know many people who were also assassinated in every single leadership of every single faction that was fighting against the Israeli colonialism and the Aqsa Intifada. I mean, we know, and Israel called them targeted assassination or targeting and so on. So again, to provide a sanitized term to cover up this crime, that it is a crime against humanity, that they have every single time they keep, and now they already announcing that they want to target this leader and that leader, and so don't you dare resist, because if you dare to resist, we're going to punish you by killing you and by killing, and they kill the leader and they kill everybody around, the family, the buildings. We know how many, we have so many examples and so on. So I think it's really, really important to connect that. The other thing I think it's really important to say that Israel has also always tried to create alternative leadership, like all colonial powers. But some recent examples, the Village League, they failed when the mayors of some municipalities won the elections. Then they tried to create pop-up and prompt some people, and we know the Israeli press, how many times they pump up Dahlan, for example, some of the people now who are the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, and they dim and they smear any other people who are actually speaking up and coming out and saying what's going on. We rarely hear any of these people being quoted, whether in the New York Times, whether in CNN. We see them on some Arab satellite stations, not all. The ones that are very much connected with the Saudi regime, with other repressive Arab regimes, of course, they don't get promoted and so on. But there are so many voices, including big voices and unknown people. I do agree with Dr. Arian also about the whole question of the cult of personality. And I think we had a very, very big problem with actually having only Yasser Arafat being the symbol of the Palestinian movement with all he's done. And at the end of the day, because he resisted and he refused to sign the so-called Barak's generous offer, in 2000, he was held captive in the Muqata'a, and the United States pressured the Palestinian Authority to create a new position called Prime Minister, if you all remember. And I think it was Sharm el-Sheikh summit. They tried it first at the Wye River plantation, very interesting for Palestinian discussion. But that, and then they actually imposed the figure of the prime minister, and they got Abu Mazen to be there, and then Salam Fayyad took over from it. So I think it's also really important for us to historicize and recognize how, when you are living in conditions which are completely asymmetrical, when you have a very huge power that's trying to crush people, that has international powers that is very much interested in it, not only in ideological grounds, not only because we're talking about settler colonialism and racism and apartheid and so on, which is definitely exists between the US and Israel. And I believe also the Saudi regime is always wondering about its legitimacy and so on. That's why they continue getting rid of dissidents every single day, anybody who says something. And they also, by the way, have a serious problem because they're supposed to be protective of Mecca and Medina. And here's Aqsa every single day being attacked, day in and day out. And we see the normalizers from the Emirates and so on walking in Al-Aqsa, just like Ben Gvir. And how are they doing this? They have a serious public relations image to recognize that. But I want to also go back to the whole question that we have material, and I think Dr. Arian, you spoke about that, material conditions for this collaboration. The whole question about the securitized industries, quote unquote, the weapons that the Saudi Arabia wants, for what? I mean, seriously, like, does really anybody think that Saudi Arabia presence is so important that it's being threatened? Why do they need all these weapons? To crush the people internally so they can never rise, and to send a signal to any government around the region and in the world, don't you dare. Saudi Arabia played a very, very terrible role, negative role, in all the counter-revolutions after the Arab revolutions took place. I don't like to say spring. I don't like some of the Western terminologies, spring and so on, but they played that, and they played that before in the crushing of the Far and Oman, in Yemen, in Bahrain. I mean, every single way we heard about that. So I think it's really, really important for us to place this. And I'm not talking about, I definitely agree with Dr. Baroud that we should engage in criticism and self-criticism. And we definitely need to hold people who claim to represent us to say, no, they don't represent us. And we do need to create leadership, because it's not enough to have the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. That's a way, a vehicle, a tool to do that. We do need Palestinian leadership, and so we have. The problem is that they keep getting killed, and they do not get enough play. And a lot of the times we get seduced by the way the West presents it, and nominates, promotes certain people over another, which is a function of the balance of forces on the ground. I mean, and yet, despite all of this, we see people fighting and resisting day in and day out. So we have thousands of leaders every single day taking up initiatives, fighting and so on. The other thing that I want to say, I agree with you, Dr. Arian, that in terms of the solidarity movement and so on, yeah, we don't really have to have just Palestinians, because Palestinians don't own the struggle for justice in for Palestine. I mean, and I think if we say that we are alone, I think that's a huge mistake, because we're not alone. We're not alone. And to whose interest does this serve to say we are alone? Why? Why do we want to actually pride ourselves in being isolated? We're not isolated. We have one of the most supportive solidarity movement around the world with any people across, but we also have a very formidable state that was to crush our very existence. So Israel is not only interested in achieving political settlement, as maybe in other, kind of like quote unquote territorial disputes or fights and that. Israel is interested in crushing any presence of Palestine, erasing any of that, because if there is Palestinians, that continues to delegitimize and undermine what Israel is all about. And so we have that, and we also have the Israeli lobby industries that continues smearing everybody with anti-Semitism, anybody who opposes Zionism, who fights against it. And I think also everybody who even in solidarity with the Palestinians being crushed day in and day out. So I think we really do need to continue more strategic organizing and to continue working with each other, to continue thinking with each other, but also with the people who are actually working day in and day out on the ground. So I get very anxious, and I know none of us said that here today, but I get very anxious when everybody says that this is the worst period for Palestine, Palestinian cause is being liquidated. How is it going to be liquidated when there are people day in and day out fighting and every single day proving that there is, yes, the old die, but the young did not forget. And people are resisting every day and establishing that Palestine exists and will exist. And the Zionist project actually is in a terrible crisis. They have a terrible crisis. Dr. Arian spoke about that. And they have all sorts of crises and so on. And this is also a big part of why they want to actually have this quote unquote normalization, relations with the Arab world, because they are dying to have people say, we recognize your presence. I'm like, go ahead, try all you want. Wrong will never become right. You can try, and the Palestinian people are proving it every single day on the ground.
Thank you very much. I want to invite Dr. Baroud and Dr. Al-Arian to give their final comments. Unfortunately, we have come to the closing of this session. Dr. Baroud, would you like to begin? As he gets his mic ready, Dr. Al-Arian, would you like to?
Sure.
Final comments.
Let me say a few words as my final comment. I just want to say that Israel could not have achieved this hegemonical power over the Middle East without having the support of foreign powers. Started with Britain in the mandate, and after that, Germany, France, other European countries chipped in, helped, protected, and nurtured the state to become this monster. But also the United States has played a major role in supporting Israel in all different forms, and therefore US is complicit in what's happening. They are now trying to be the midwife of what's taking place today. And therefore, we need also to start calling for people to address this issue. The United States should not get free card. Whether people in the air, they should also start fighting and resisting against this hegemony, foreign hegemony, US hegemony, and trying to dictate what would be the future of the Middle East. They tried it militarily, they failed miserably during Afghanistan and Iraq, and the American people paid terribly for it. $6 trillion at least were spent on these adventures. We're talking about at least a couple of million, if not more, people suffering between death and other disasters. And I don't think US and American people would like to be associated with this destruction and mayhem. and to push for Israel to become normalized in the region. Eventually, that's going to blow up in their faces, and there will be a terrible price for that. Secondly, I want to point out that Israel, with its current discourse, with its current posture, poses a grave threat to the security and future of peoples in the region. Every single conflict takes place. A lot of people do not believe that, but if they go and look closely to it, they will find a foreign hand, a Zionist hand, and an Israeli hand. Part of what's happening today in Sudan, for example, has to do with the fact that even though the Trump administration was able to convince the military coup leaders to normalize with Israel, they found it difficult to actually make it happen. So eventually you had this guy who was second in charge with his own militia tied to the United Arab Emirates that were trying to stage a coup over the current leader who was hesitant to continue this path. So what we have today is a civil war in Sudan that has pretty much destroyed Sudan. And you could see that the origin of this has a lot. Yes, I understand that we have a lot to do internally, but a major part was also this issue. Same thing could be said, they tried with Libya, but their stupidity is that they exposed themselves prematurely. And that also, we could see today that there is a competition between East and West. If you go back to what is called the Oded-Union Plan that was hatched back in 1982, it was a strategic plan by the Israeli right, which was embraced by Sharon, by the way, in a speech that he gave to NATO in July of 1983, which is to further fragment the Middle East. Instead of 22 Arab countries, make them actually 43. You can actually look it up. The late Israel Shahak actually translated the original Hebrew of this plan. So there is an Israeli hand in trying to create a Kurdish state and to create these different states. And what they were trying to do in Lebanon, the whole destruction of Lebanon, this David Chang, the guy who was in charge of the Middle East during the Trump administration, he was boasting how single-handedly he destroyed the economy of Lebanon. And he can trace it back, how he did that. A few years ago, what was 1,500 liras per dollar? Today it's 100,000. That didn't come about because Lebanon, of course, they exploit the problems within societies. But the whole notion that Israel has nothing to do with what's happening around is a myth. Israel has everything to do, and if it continues this hegemonical attack on, the whole region would suffer. So people need to realize this, and they need to rise up and start resisting. Don't wait for the Palestinians to stop this normalization train that's taking over. The Saudis need to rise up. The Emiratis needs to speak out. The Moroccans need to talk about this and resist it. It's about your futures. The Palestinians already know their future. They have seen their future. They have seen your future in their present. And therefore, they are resisting. They refuse to succumb. They refuse to be subjugated. They refuse to lay down. They are resisting. But if you want to know what your future is, then look at what the Palestinians are going through, and you would know then your future. That's why you need to rise up. And for the Palestinians, they need to stay steadfast. We need to engage this fight and to know what the real goal is. The real goal is to defeat this settler, colonialist, supremacist structure that wants to take over not just Palestine, but the entire Middle East. Thank you.
Dr. Baroud, your concluding comments?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. They can see their future in your present. That's really quite powerful. Dr. Sami, I just want to say that even though normalization has a trajectory that goes back to very, very early days of the establishment of Israel, I think the ethnic cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé speaks about even prior to the establishment of Israel on the ruins of Palestine during the time of the Nakba, of how Zionist leaders engaged various Arab rulers in secret negotiations and discussions about their plans and whatnot. So this is an old business. The only difference is that when normalization efforts were put on the table in the past, whether by Israel or by the Arabs themselves, it was during a time in which Israel could claim some kind of ascendancy or some kind of leverage. During for example, the Camp David, Egypt was desperate for a greater American integration and the opening up of the economy under Anwar Sadat. The Fahd plan that Dr. Sami spoke about came during the time of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. The so-called Arab Peace Initiative 2002 during the Second Intifada. This time around, it doesn't have to be the same thing. Things have changed. Israel is no longer the powerful player that they used to be. They are fragmented as a society. The studies and statements made by top Zionist leaders within Israel, completely removed from the discussion of the Israeli occupation and apartheid, is what do we do if the government collapses? What do we do if the military refuses to follow order? What do we do if the country is divided into militias? This is reported in Israeli media. This is Israel's new reality. And you come during this time where Israel is desperate and on its knees, you come and you give them that lifeline. So yes, it's part of a trajectory, but it's different type of normalization, as if it's the Arabs who intentionally and purposely want to save Israel to gain favor with the United States, whether in exchange for some recognition of the Sahara, Western Sahara by Morocco, or F-35s by Emirates, or whatever the Saudis want from Washington and so forth. So basically, they are using Palestine as a bargaining chip. They're not under any kind of pressure. It's just a simple bargaining chip to get something that maybe even at the end of the day, it's not that consequential from geopolitical terms. I think what Palestinians need to understand is that we keep talking about solidarity as if it's a Western concept. When we talk about solidarity, we are talking about the BDS movement in Europe and North America. This has to change. We need to start seeing solidarity as something that is founded in the global South among other nations and countries that share with us our national liberation experiences, our struggle against colonialism, against apartheid, and against imperialism. Because these are the countries that are now legitimizing Israel after 75 years of delegitimization. We know that as if Mohammed Bazoum, and this, by the way, this is really quite interesting. If Mohammed Bazoum was not deposed in the military by the military junta a few weeks ago, he was actually on the verge of normalizing with Israel. And that's not my view on the issue. That's Antony Blinken himself, who worked very, very hard to get Niger into into the position of normalization. And it was about, an announcement was about to be made when all of this has happened. We need to understand what's happening in East Africa, or West Africa rather. We need to understand the geopolitical changes and how we can factor in that through building alliances with societies and with intellectual and popular movements in these countries. I know we do not have a centralized leadership. Hopefully one day we will have that. Hopefully one day the Palestinian Authority is no longer the Palestinian leadership. But until that happens, we need to extend our alliances into the global South so that we can fight Israel in this new medium and new platform Netanyahu has created for Israel, sadly successfully, since 2016 until today.
Thank you very much. We have unfortunately run out of time. One comment I will end on, just reflecting on the profound insights of all of the panelists, is that history always seems most fragile when it stares you in the face. And right now, it seems as though normalization is the way that history is flowing. But from the comments, both Dr. Baroud's comments and Dr. Abdulhadi's comments, that this is a moment of extreme desperation on the part of the Palestinian leadership, the Arab leadership, on the part of Israel, on the part of the West, in trying to safeguard an order which seems to be from the inside rotten to the core and has lost almost everything that the Arabs are now using is Palestine as a bargaining chip. The sacred cow in their arsenal is coming on the table, is a sign of the fragility and the fragile times we live in. And with that, I think that we can reiterate our support for the Palestinian cause. There is no reason to lose hope that after all resources are expended in safeguarding the fragile power that remains, we look forward to a new dawn, and it will come soon. And the ideas that were proposed here are part of that solution. Creating a global movement, once again reiterating our support for the BDS movement and other such pressures, remaining steadfast. So I want to also thank the translators who have done an impeccable job. Omar Kahwaja and Dana Kassab, they have done an amazing job getting this message out to Arabic speakers, and we at CIGA try as much as we can to keep our programming multilingual, keeping in the cosmopolitan and pluralistic context in which we live, which is the dynamic Western Asian part of the globe. And with that, I want to say to all of our viewers that we will be conducting another seminar next month. Please stay tuned for our programming. And good night from Istanbul. And I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.